In London, if I go to you first here, if you were to open up some, the mainstream media websites and looking at the situation going on in Europe with the migration refugee crisis, a lot of commentators will say all of this is because of Russia's military intervention invited by the Damascus government 18 weeks ago. I want to stress 18 weeks ago. What's wrong with that story in your mind? Go ahead.
Well, the Arab sting unleashed by NATO has been raging now for 5 years. It's brought nothing but collapsed societies and devastation and trauma. And it is this ongoing continuation of 500 years of colonialism and imperialism, looting, conducting genocide and rape and destruction of our homelands is the exact reason why people are coming to Europe. Now, I'd like to quote Vladimir Putin, who said in May last year, shoulder to shoulder with the leadership of Vietnam, South Africa, Belarus, and many others, with the Indian army marching and with the Mongolian army marching and the Chinese army marching in Moscow to commemorate the 70th anniversary of the victory over fascism. He said, "The history calls again to our wisdom and vigilance. We must not forget the ideas of racial supremacy and exclusiveness had provoked the bloodiest war ever. This affected 80% of the world population. Many European nations were enslaved and occupied. Our entire multi-ethnic nation rose to fight for our motherland's freedom."
Let's talk about another bad character in all of this here. Is Turkey. Turkey is blackmailing its NATO allies. It's blackmailing an organization it wants to get into, the European Union. If it doesn't do, its quote-unquote allies don't do what it wants, it's going to open up the gate and let even more people in. I mean, what kind of ally is this? And oh, by the way, he's threatening to start the Third World War. Go ahead.
The AKP regime have been absolutely despicable in the way they've traded on the blood of the people of the region in being a junior partner to NATO in the destruction of Libya and now Syria. And you are quite right. They are using and abusing these precarious, these poor, traumatized refugees from Syria as a bargaining tool with European Union, with whom they desperately want to get into bed with.
I mean, let's look at the example of Libya. In 2011, Libya was a stable state which provided decent welfare, education for its people. Whatever you want to think of the Gaddafi regime. The NATO intervention led to the destabilization and the collapse first of the Gaddafi regime, the killing of Gaddafi by essentially the French and British. But then what we've seen is that the intervention was then followed by the complete collapse of Libya. So a situation today we have two rival governments where in that power vacuum Daesh has entered into Libya. The West once again talking about further, believe it or not, intervention in Libya to try and counter Daesh, even though their efforts are failing in Syria and in Iraq. And what we have is destabilization of Libya threatening Europe, but also, of course, Libya then becomes an open door for those people trying to cross to Italy.
They won't change their foreign policy because their foreign policy, I mean, you have to think about, the elites right now, world powers, Western powers essentially, want to run the world as you would do a corporation. And people need to really understand this, and then you will understand, what is happening. What they're trying to do is just move people around and have, again, cheap labor. I completely agree with this. And strip people from their rights and thin out civil liberties even more under the pretense of trying to secure people and, national security, the god of national security.
I mean, when you talk about the European Union creating peace, I mean, it makes me laugh. What they did in former Yugoslavia with Germany recognizing Croatian independence triggered the war in former Yugoslavia. And what they've done in Ukraine, creating that war, and then, of course, blaming it on Vladimir Putin when it was the West, and in particular the European Union driving it. And as for prosperity, I think we have to go back to something else. The driving force of poverty in Europe, and there is poverty now, and living standards in this country, Britain, have been falling since 2008, is the neoliberal free market policies pursued by the European Union, beggaring the people of Greece. And incidentally, there's a refugee problem in Europe. People of Greece, Italy, Portugal coming to other countries in Europe because they can't get jobs as a consequence of what has happened.